So I'm here with Liz and Kyriaki, and the three of us are deeply immersed in the exploration today of polarities and the polarity moves, and specifically what we call polarity management moves. And the core premise that we are exploring in this conversation is that you either lead your life consciously and intentionally with awareness, and therefore you're able to release the various polarities that you'll find yourself locked in, or your life pulls your strings and you are led by the circumstances and the events around you, and you'll often feel that you are a victim or a tool in the hands of events outside of you. Come inside this exploration. We touch many different moves. We move all around the parking lot. This is a free-ranging exploration in how polarities appear in our personal lives, in our professional lives, and we will look to codify some of these moves with perhaps further examples and exact briefs on future conversations. Discover for yourself. And I'm going to ask you, Liz and Kyriaki, to introduce yourselves first and talk just for a bit as we get started about what comes alive for you when we bring the focus to polarities and to what polarities in our lives represent, and why it is important that we become aware of polarities and build practice, a conscious practice of how to navigate and apply specific strategies and moves in the face of polarities in life, at work, certainly when we monitor events on the global stage and any other arena of life.
Well, I can start. What comes alive with me with this whole examination of polarities and the duality that we live within, I was just describing earlier how I've come into a new awareness of what liberation is possible if we're actually able to move beyond. And I think that there are so many instances and so many experiences and so many things to look at, within this, that's kind of like an inspiration, but there's a lot of different pieces and ingredients in that if we don't actually work to identify and move beyond, then we spend a large part of our life actually with a lack of consciousness and being stuck in a kind of reactivity of actually something else kind of running the show, and we're unaware of it. So, like, one example for me is just in this situation here. There's a part of me that wants to do well and wants to look good, and the tension that causes then actually can cause me to contract and constrict and not allow the flow of what I want to see happen here. So what I'm trying to do in this situation is, first of all, make sure that I'm breathing. And then when experiencing this in other situations, which I think is very common, fight, flight, or freeze, they say, to really look into, well, what is it that I want, and what am I afraid of losing, and where am I placing my trust, so that I can get myself back into the flow of things where life can naturally take place. So this is how it's living with me, at this point, in this moment.
And so you're highlighting there, Liz, first, the recognition that unless we become aware and practice mindful awareness, we could easily be spending most of the quote-unquote awake time more or less asleep to the fact that we are run by something else, and that we are triggered and maneuvered by all the pressure systems around us that forever lead us into one side of a duality or a polarity or another.
Right. Everything else pulling our strings, pushing our buttons.
Yeah. And then you're saying there is literally a sense of becoming awake and alive when you see that and you step back from it, or you're able to see it from above, which is one of the moves we can actually engage in to see what we are experiencing or what we are being triggered by stepping back or by stepping up.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely an awareness, and then there are definite strategies to put in place and begin the practice of.
To add to what Lisa was saying, which is really interesting and very inspiring, and it's a question that has been puzzling me from a very young age, when I realized very early that a lot of our time, energy, thoughts, and feelings is spent vacillating between two options, often getting locked in these two options and going from one side to the other. For instance, in a young age, a girl would wonder, should I listen to mommy or daddy? Or should I play with my dolls? Or should I play boys' games? Should I study what I love? Or should I study something that will secure me and give me a good job? Then should I marry or should I choose career? Should I choose motherhood or not? So many questions that puzzle us, not only inside, but also in our social behavior with others. We often find ourselves being polarized in our relationships with our spouses or with our children. And a recent example is that happened to me this week. I am a mother of a 16-year-old daughter who wanted to dye her hair blonde, being a dark-haired and dark-skinned. That was very appalling to my aesthetics. So we had a dispute, and then I had to stop myself and ask, is this, the following question, is this, and to what extent, from 1 to 10, a life or death issue? How much should I be setting boundaries? Or is my aesthetic out of date? And it was an interesting question that helped me to change a bit my perspective and start to compromise in these small polarities, because I think that we cannot always win in polarities and we cannot always lose. There is an art to compromise and not be locked in the either or, but to find other options and other percentages that lead to solutions, that lead to agreements or co-creating and allow movement. Otherwise, we are stuck, we are polarized, and a lot of disputes and quarrels ensue that really deplete us, and we misspend our energy and happiness.
So let me name some of the moves you were running through as you are narrating your experience, because one of the elements we are exploring and are interested in is developing a portfolio. Sometimes we will call it a loom of polarity management moves. The first move you were describing, well, actually, even before that, you're talking about your experience as a mother, and right there, the obvious point is that, well, parenting not only has always been difficult, being a parent today is especially challenging prospect because of the degree of exposure that our children will now get to at a very early age, which we didn't have, say, 40 or 50 years ago, to reveal our age a little bit. But the first move you were describing is you found yourself in a heated dispute with your daughter.
Yes.
And the first move is actually an interior move, what I describe sometimes as the somatic move. It is actually the first move to produce awareness. You either pay attention to the tone of the voices and the volume or the decibel of the voices in the room, or the shortness of breath, or the tension, or whatever else that just brings you back inside your body to recognize that we are now in an escalating dynamic where two sides may be saying to each other or shouting or screaming at each other lines out of a script that has been played a million times by other people. And as Liz was saying earlier, this is not us actually playing the show. This is the show or the play playing us by us being inducted as though something else is pulling our strings. And something in you have developed the practice that you slow down, or you pause, or you take a deep breath, and for a minute you separate from the exchange and you look back inside. That's the first move to regain awareness, to create a distance from reactivity to create space. So the first move is to step back from reactivity, and as Liz was saying earlier, the easiest thing to do is to take a deep breath, or maybe 3 or more. And then do you have another tool? And the tool you offered was you ask a powerful question. You ask, is it a life-threatening situation? Could this be life-threatening? And what that move is about, it's a perspective-changing, perspective-shifting move. Instead of being locked in the machinations of the moment, you step above it and you put it inside a bigger picture. So it's the perspective change move, it's the big picture move, and it's the, is it truly that life-threatening, which will put it against the higher or the bigger criteria to measure the situation. So that those are the first few moves that I've heard. Let me just pause here and see what would you want to add or build, both of you, on me trying to codify in language, in strategic language, the moves that you actually operate with every day when you face those kind of situations.
Well, I don't know if this is a move that you've actually mentioned, but it's come up in me a lot lately as I refer to it as don't do it, let it be done. You know, to bring yourself back into the flow of something, because, you know, when we're trying to control a situation too much or trying too hard, you know, we take ourselves out of the center, out of control. And, you know, so we're not trusting actually, you know, maybe not trusting the intelligence the child does have, or not trusting the situation. So that's a move that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, some would call it a surrender move.
A surrender, okay.
Not surrender in the sense of giving up.
Right,
surrender
yes.
in the sense you're describing, which is allow the flow and releasing the anxiety that I need to be in control or I need to manage the situation because of God knows what, because I'm a parent, because I am an important person, because I see whatever self-image or that I impose upon myself I'm supposed to know. All those could be pathways to the false premise that I need to control the situation. And you're saying there is a moment where I let go. I release that idea. I don't need to control the situation.
and to the idea that there's possibly other intelligences other than what we have in our front executive brain to come into play. And as long as we are holding so tight, we're only using just this very small part of our possible intelligence.
So Kyriaki, do you want to come on this surrender move or release and allow the flow move? Or should we get back to the last move you were describing where you started to talk about percentages? And so please lead us where you want to go with this.
I find very interesting the notion of Liz about flow, because in this scenario that I was saying before, it was interesting that my spouse, my husband, had a different approach, actually more flowing in this case. So it was a more effective move because in a way he allowed her to do what she wished. And this caused a moderation in her in wanting to do an extreme haircut or an extreme hair dye, because he allowed her. He was more with the flow, let's say. I was more putting the boundaries in this case. She moderated what she wanted to do. And in the end, the result was actually very attractive. So it's very interesting to allow the flow. And
But in this specific example, I mean, you're really opening for us here the whole family dynamic, because my immediate thought is it an archetypal story where the father and the daughter seem to be more on the same vibe, or he was just playing more moderate to moderate you, both of which are valid, by the way, but you'll have all those dynamics in families. And talking about polarities, we could do several episodes on polarities just within dynamics, because often when you have a family of three, you will find 2 versus 1, and there could be any composition. In your example, you have an experience with 4. So you tell us what the equation is. Is it 2 against 2, or is it 3 against 1, or is it all of the above, all the options?
It's 2 against 2 most of the time. But
by which you mean the 2 girls against the 2 parents?
That happens also. But I find interesting the flow, because also during my working years, I just to say to Liz that I was working in the banking sector for 25 years in various positions, from employee, secretary, up to manager. I was a branch manager for 13 years in both blooming times for the stock market and for the loans market in Greece, and also in very devastating financial crisis. One of the things that I noticed often when there were complaining customers coming, or desperate customers coming, or angry customers coming, one of the things that was working and was very effective was just to listen to them and tell them, you are right. I see your point of view. I see where you're coming from. So just to allow the flow and not resist and not say no was half of the solution. So just to recognize where the other person is coming from, just to say, I see your point of view. I can understand your feelings. Even a touch, even just to touch the person was very, very effective in calming down the pressure, the friction. The person felt recognized, more balanced. And in very difficult situations, I find it very effective to say to the other person, I see where you're coming from, see your point of view, and to allow this flow, not to resist, not to oppose.
I would describe this as the disarming move. You disarm the person. You recognize them. You listen to them. You sometimes would even paraphrase the point they made. And even if you can't actually meet their need and expectation, the fact that you recognize what they said, you give them a chance to be heard, and you validate them as a human being. All of the above is a powerful way to disarm tension and polarization. I have a process where I lead in leadership strategic workshops with teams. They often are teams with very brilliant leaders, but they often have very ineffective conversations because they either talk at different altitudes or conflict in their point of views, and sooner or later there will be a complaint vector that will appear in the conversation. And the teaching that I offer about that is that a complaint is the misdirected energy of an unmet need. And so the two steps is, first of all, to recognize the need. That's what you're doing. And then if we can, make the next move, which is honor the need and address it. We're not always in a situation to do so. But first, actually confirm and validate the need. And so what I have found in working with teams, I actually coach them, because what happens if a person offers a complaint here, they are masquerading the unexpressed or unmet need here. So part of my coaching and my training is to help them voice the need on the front end. I have a need. I want to make sure that the unit I'm leading is not going to be fired and be found without a job. So that's why I'm protective, and I may be saying all sorts of things, but this is my need. Because a lot of the time in business conversations, we have displaced statements. The displaced statements are somebody is protecting a point here, but they don't want to reveal it. They conceal it by giving a whole story here. And the practice there is a practice about voicing your need openly. In many of our, no matter where you were raised, in most places, we were not trained to clearly and easily source our need and voice it openly. There is a variety of behavioral conducts, something that whatever you need, whatever you want is not as important, which is partly what you're grappling with your daughters, perhaps. How do you validate her in this formative age, validate that she is entitled and free to have her own need and her own desire, and still maintain some kind of a discernment process in what she is choosing to do and how she is navigating her decisions about her identity and self-view and presentation and such. So these are all very charged and important spaces, and people run through their life often going through the motions without actually being able to step back and disarm themselves, disarm others, find greater ease to... Actually, the practice that I teach is you speak out your need and then frame a request. I would like to request, or I would like to propose. And then the other person can frame a counter request or a counter proposal. It's extraordinary what happens when people actually learn to navigate a conversation with that behavioral software. You can sometimes go through what otherwise would take 3 hours in 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
I'm finding this really key to identifying the polarized situations, because mostly it's needs in opposition. Quite often the large or what we encounter as a problem, in our lives is needs in opposition. And if you haven't really identified what the needs are, you don't get the opposition, you don't get the way out.
Right. Well, so I wonder what other moves we want to highlight. Perhaps, I think you already touched it, both of you, but perhaps I can bring it into focus. It's what I call the integration move, and it's adjacent and maybe the same, sometimes not the same, with the percentages move that Kyriaki you started talking to. So let me give an example of what I mean by the integration move, and then be great to get both your sense about this. So when I started working with leadership teams some 20 years ago now, I would take people on a 4 or 5 day retreat, and the idea was to discover their passion and purpose in life and articulate their core values and so on. And often very soon, if not by day 1, by day 2, people would surface the conflict and the struggle of work, what they called work and life balance. And in the beginning, what I used to do is I used to say, okay, paint for me, please, 2 spheres, one of your work and one of your life, and show me what it is. Where are they in relation to each other? And that early move was the reframe move, because what I would then show them, so much for advanced technology, I'm going to paint it here I would say, if you don't have to have your life and your passion, central passion, and your work fully overlapping, if there is even a narrow area of overlap, if you can find a way to bring some of your passion to your work, it disarms that sense of tension and dichotomy and sense of separation and fragmentation in yourself, that you hate going to work and you really would want to be somewhere else, which is rarely the situation. The people I got to work with often would not be people that hate their work. They're actually very much appreciative of the work, but still there were those that would bring about that tension. But then I found that was not a sufficient move. It was a reframe move, but I really needed to integrate and reframe at a whole other level the idea of work and life, because you have one life. And because when you show up at work, you're there and it's part of your life. And when you then go back into your role as a parent, or your role as a spouse, or your role as a friend, or your role as a citizen, or your role as somebody who cares for the environment. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up describing the 5 or 6 or 7 or 9 different major roles that you play through your life, in which your professional life, your career, is a central important role, because it's a role that enables you to participate in some of the other roles. And then we took another step and we journeyed into each person, I'm describing very briefly what would sometimes be a couple 3-day process with all sorts of exercises. But each person would lead into discovering their core values. What are the core values that animate and propel and energize and are central to them? And so what you started to get was a 3-dimensional picture of the person's interior importances and values. As one simple way to define value is what is important for you. And so that was the interior cosmology. And one person would write freedom and autonomy and beauty and care. And a second person would write friendship and loyalty and love and collaboration. And a third person will write that the most important cherished values are to do with honesty and with faith. And a fourth person will talk about their personal growth and development. So each person will develop their interior cosmology of core values. And then they would have the exterior cosmology of the various major roles they play in and play through in their life. And what that would do, it would create a much bigger integrated picture of the multifaceted nature of life. And it will then bring into focus the idea that when we experience polarizing tensions, sometimes those will point to a tension between different roles. And the tension would often appear around resource, either time resource or energy resource or attention resource. But sometimes the polarizing will appear around how you'd be called in one of your roles, or you'd need to do something that perhaps will come into conflict or tension with one of your core values. So the invitation there was see yourself as a whole person and embrace and integrate the greater interior and exterior cosmology that you are. And now, all of a sudden, we have a whole new context to talking about personal growth and versatility, personal versatility, and how do you become more proficient and more masterful in managing, quote unquote, a modern Renaissance life, because you want to be true to your core values. And by the way, as you go through life, some of those values may update themselves and change order of importance. And some of the roles you are playing in and plays through will also change. And I thought that was both the integration move and the development move, because you were really called into recognizing that you are not, Liz, as you said earlier, you are not locked in a binary. You are really a multiplicity. But not only are you a multiplicity, you're often a multiplicity within, operating in a multiplicity without. And the journey of living is bringing greater awareness to where there are tensions and why, disarming polarities. So that's one of the moves, the disarming moves, the recognizing, the acknowledging move, the releasing move, that where we allow for flow, and the recognition that it's a journey. success in that meant not never being triggered. Success in that meant that if a year ago I was triggered and it took me an hour to regain my footing and balance, that today I can rebalance myself instead of in an hour, in 10 minutes or in 2 minutes. That means I've practiced certain interior calibration. Success in that meant that I was present to all those different roles and to all those different values, and that I didn't allow the polarity of victimhood on the one hand, or being victorious on the other hand, manage my life. I released myself to the settlement that I don't need to and I cannot always win on all fronts. And there was a settlement in finding the more or less best that I can be today in each of those capacities and roles. And the more or less best had the note of forgiveness and acceptance. So right there is the forgiveness and acceptance move. So all those are various moves to manage a life of multiplicity in a chaotic world. It's curious. This is more the work I used to do 15, 20 years ago. I recognize in many ways it was seeding and building skills and capabilities for the kind of struggles that people are even more so grappling with today, but already grappled with in the early 2000s. So I went here on a tangent, but I'm curious, what resonates from any of that with you?
Well, I can say that you touched on many different issues. The one is really opening up the scope, what I would call opening up the scope view, introducing, let's say, the many roles we have in our life, and that they all need some time from us to devote some time in our family life, in our social life, in our work life, in our personal life, and make the agreements with other people that we don't want to compromise completely what we want. The other important thing you said is that you invited these people in your training groups to a bigger vision, to a core fundamental thing that they wanted in their life that changed their perspective. For instance, for me, at work, I started to be successful only when I brought into my working life my love for humans, my love for human beings. When I started to see, not as a potent customer or something like this, but as a human being, and also the people that I were working with as human beings, and what are the skills, what are the talents, what is their brilliance. And this changed completely the scenery.
Let me pause there just for a minute, because this is so important in the example that you give the Kyriaki, because this idea of separation between professional life and personal life, which is the foundation of that work-life balance or struggle, goes back all the way to previous generations at work, before we were in the workforce, more our parents, 50s, 60s, 70s of the 20th century, where this idea of professionalism and professional life in many spaces became under the influence of the Industrial Revolution, and later the technological revolution and the professional revolution that was created around those mechanistic attitudes and views to life. The practice was leave anything human outside of the professional arena, you've got to behave in a particular kind of way, almost machine-like. What you're describing, that earlier on in your professional life, you made a move, you made an integration move. The integration move you led was to reintegrate your humanity, your love for human, the way you cherish the diversity of talents and capabilities and differences that people bring to the professional arena, to life. And the moment you're saying that you were prepared to reintegrate that, you started to succeed. So, and we're talking many years ago. So, core to your journey in life, whether you called it at the time in this name or not, was that natural, intuitive integration move in yourself.
Yes, yes. And also in what you said before, I saw the importance between balance and movement, which is in a way another move, because when we stop to move, we are bound to fall in the one or the other side. Let's say when we are cycling or when we are walking on a narrow bar, or when we want to stay also very unmovable, we need to move a small part of our body, like the guards outside the palace or monuments.
What do they do?
They move a little part of their toes, I think. So balance and movement, I am thinking also that this is very important, because the moment you get stuck and you don't move, let's say there are agreements that are not refreshed, they are not updated, either in a family, in a team, in a work environment, in a country, in a regime, in a religion, in anything, that are not updated with what is going on now, with the needs of the now, sooner or later, they will cause fixation and bring out frictions and polarities. So agreements need to be refreshed, need to be checked. Are they valid? Are they working? Is there transparency in who gets rewarded? You know, in teams, in groups of people. It can be in choirs, it can be in the sports teams, it can be in churches, it can be in societies, clubs, anything. So are the rules or the agreements kept? Are they transparent? Are they fair? It's interesting that there was a recent research from Google called the Aristotle Project, according to which the best and more successful teams were the ones that they felt they were working in an environment of safety, transparency, fairness, and where they felt free to do mistakes, to voice an idea, that they could do that. So balance and movement and updating the contracts, I would say.
Yes. So the idea of balance and movement and the idea of releasing movement is probably a meta element in all the moves we are describing, because every move describes a release from a stuck situation. But it's a very important observation that the two observations you're making, that to sustain an equilibrium, sustain any balance, there has to be some movement. And anytime we experience stuckness, which will often be centered on some kind of a locked polarity, the search to find the first place, the path of least resistance, And it's not always easy because often there is tremendous resistance, but where you can initiate movement is perhaps the first move to go into. And often when you can't initiate movement outside of you, you need to initiate the movement inside of you, which is what we discussed earlier, where you turn inside and you begin by changing your inner state. Then the other broader prospect you're inviting us to is the inquiry of updating and refreshing whatever it is that we look at, whether it's agreements, whether it's belief systems, whether it's operating systems, anything. So, Liz, is there anything you want to put here? Because my sense is today is what it is about is just blowing open the whole space, and we'll come back to go deeper perhaps on some of these moves. Is there anything else you'd want to put in this at the moment?
Well, just with the idea of integration that you just introduced here, I can see, the integration that you're speaking about in the workplace being very important. And it's kind of, finding what you have in common, say, with the workspace. That for me, in the team that I work with is to do with excellence. Like I could see very early on that they were really on about excellence. Now, I didn't always agree with what they wanted to become excellent in, but I could identify with excellence. The desire, whatever you're doing, to be excellent in it, and to have that honor in that as well. And that has helped tremendously over the years of actually being part of the team and having that, that energetic flow, and say, yeah, go for it. Being able to have that kind of passion come forth in that. So I can see that was integrating. Also, I've understood that integration can be, say, within within oneself, you could view it as, you don't chop off the hand that offends thee, or the eye that, pluck out the eye that offends thee, as was a saying, I think, from in biblical times, many years ago. And I probably messed it up, but the idea of, okay, so you find yourself, once again, you fell for that. You got embroiled, you got entangled in this situation. Well, don't shame yourself for it, because that's going to not have that's not going to have the result that you want. That, integrate that, allow yourself of the forgiveness, allowing yourself to make mistakes and to not be perfect, and that is allowing then to integrate it. I see that the move you were speaking about with your children was integrating, in that your spouse could entertain the idea without shaming. And I think this is an important ingredient. And there was an integration going on there that then allowed like a natural intelligence to come into play, rather than like a resistance kind of, I want my way, to be at play. So I think there's a lot of applications of this integration as well.
So I listened to everything we are exploring today, and it seems to me that we are all over the place, all over the parking lot. And I think it's exactly what this needed to be, because life is all over the place and life is all over the parking lot. And we possibly touched a dozen different moves. Some we instantiated with examples, some we only touched briefly. And the invitation, the core invitation we're making here is recognize you are a one whole integrated life. And that one whole integrated life is made of and is encompassing and encompassed by a universe of tremendous multiplicity within and without. And anytime you allow yourself to be locked in a limiting binary equation, inside your own head, should I not, or with somebody else around a conflict, you contract and narrow the range of who you are and what you can be, sometimes by 90%. You literally become not just suboptimal in your response, but you become subhuman in the sense of you took yourself out or offline from the fullness and the richness of what human life is all about. And what we have explored in this conversation today are the different moves you can make to release, to unleash, to unlock, to free up, to integrate, to transcend. And we will come back on next explorations to further these, because these are so important if we are to live a fuller life, if we are to live a life of intention and purpose and clarity, and lead intentionally in all the different roles of our lives, and become the more fully embodied humans we can be. So thank you for visiting with us. Come join again, drop us a line with your thoughts about what else you would like us to explore here at Portals of Perception, and explore more on the site and stay in touch. Thank you.